You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi on the Friday Sports Show, bringing you all the news from the local area and around the world. And on this show we're quite fortunate to bring some really top guests, top professionals in sport across a broad range of areas: athletes, footballers, coaches, physios, media experts. And our goal is to bring you these guests who can share their experiences. And today we have a fantastic guest who has got an abundance of experience as a top professional, well-respected professional. So it's a good opportunity for us as listeners and to listen and to see what he's got to say. He's the head of performance services and lead physiotherapist of GB Boxing. We've seen boxing at the moment, you could say, it's made a bit of a renaissance in the media, but obviously behind the scenes people have still been working hard for a long time. So we'll get an insight into what it's like in that world, because we sort of see the big names, and the last year or so we've obviously seen heavyweight, the strong tradition of British boxing and certainly in heavyweight has been shown on TV, and we've all sort of sat up in the early hours to watch some of those high profile fights. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background that we're probably not aware of. So Ian Gatt, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for coming on board.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for the invite.
No, it's great to have you on board, and it's really interesting what you do. And I suppose our listeners are probably wondering how it began for you, how you got into the role that you do.
Well, like anything else, when you set out, I don't think that you know exactly what role you're going to be into. I knew, so I've been a physio for 20 years now. I'm actually from Malta, beautiful island in the Mediterranean, at least when the flights were flying, which aren't currently. But yeah, so it's a beautiful country. But I knew straight away that when I wanted to be a physio, I wanted to be a sports physio. And I knew that although we've got sports in my country, it's not at the highest level. So I knew straight away once I graduated, I wanted to leave. So I always wanted to be a sports physio, and the first place I went to was actually Greece, because I knew that the Olympics were going to be up in 2004. So I went there in 2000 as soon as I finished my studies. The first thing I realized is that you need to learn Greek. So that was the first hurdle which I had to get over. I really loved my stay over there. I stayed for 5 years, so I stayed till 2005. They were probably what people would say in Greece the golden years of Greece, because the economy was good, sports was really good. So I did that, became a sports physio, went to the Athens Olympics, actually with the Greek team at the time. So it was my first, let's say, home Olympics. And then after that, I realized that if I wanted to continue my career, I had to probably leave the country. And in fact, the venture brought me to the UK. I decided to do a master's in the UK, and then they announced the Olympics in 2005. They announced the Olympics to be in London in 2012, and the first thing that came to my mind, I thought, I have to be there, and I want to be there with the British team, and that's what happened. So I was lucky enough to land a very good job with British volleyball initially. I did 2 years with them as they were preparing for the London Games. There was some situation around funding, and also at the same time, British boxing. This was 2009 now. We're looking for a head physiotherapist. We spoke. I did the usual, went for the interview, got the job, and when I look back, I think I would have never imagined that boxing would have become what it has become now, both as an Olympic and as a British professional force, because both Olympic and professional have really, as you said, you were talking like a renaissance period. This is probably the golden era of boxing. It's fantastic, both at Olympic level, grassroots levels, but also at professional levels, and I'm privileged to be working in both those areas, both the Olympics and the professional side. But I didn't think that, 11 years later, I'd still be in that same sport, which I really love.
Yeah, so I mean, your story is inspirational in itself. I think, like you said, Malta's a beautiful country and a beautiful place. I've visited there, and obviously it takes a lot of courage to sort of up sticks and go somewhere new, and then sort of like you've been to Greece, and that was a great Olympics and a great Olympics for Greece as well, and they've done the European Cup in football too at the time. But then to come across to the UK and do a masters and sort of further your education as much as you have done, what's it been like culturally in terms of adapting? Ian, what's the sort of been like in terms of, say, going to a new country and then you adapt to one culture and you have to adapt to another culture? How's that been for you?
I'd say for me it has been relatively easy, both because coming from Malta, we get lots of tourists every year. I mean, I used to work as a barman in the summers and even across the year, really, because I used to love that social interaction with all sorts of people, both my Maltese counterparts, but also all the foreigners that used to come. So, you get like 2 million people will come over the year, and, numbers keep increasing. So when I went to Greece, I think the language was hard, the barrier, but one of the first things I realized is that, when you speak to somebody in their own language, you speak to them to the heart, because they realize, one, the Greeks know how hard the language is, but also I was Mediterranean like they are, so that was the first thing. Yeah. When I moved to England, again, it wasn't hard because, English is a first language in Malta also. So although we have both our first languages are English and Maltese being also a national language, at university we study in English. So there was no problem with the barrier. But also, we've got a massive heritage with England because, as you may know, in the Second World War, Malta and England worked really well together, obviously, against the enemy. So, there's a long tradition and long respect. We're part of the Commonwealth also. So, again, when it comes to sporting events, we participate in the Commonwealth. And again, that for me was an inspiration itself, going to the Commonwealth as part of as going to the Olympics. So I'd say, yes, like anything else, you have to adapt. It always takes a bit of time to adapt to the different way people live, the different ways they approach food and everything. But the reality is today, the world is one big city, is it? It's not like back in the days where nobody knew what's happening. Now with social media, WhatsApp groups, you can keep in touch with everybody, and everybody knows where you are and what's happening.
Absolutely, yes. It certainly is the world a smaller place, and like you says, and in terms of yourself, I mean, what you've achieved in your role, what's the sort of perception back in Malta in terms of, as in when you do go back and have been back, what's their sort of perception of what you managed to achieve in your profession, Ian?
Well, for me, it's really great because I've got colleagues who are with me at university and also my same tutors. They really send me some great messages, and especially because I'll post things like either when I've been to an Olympics or major events or my day-to-day work. I obviously also work with Anthony Joshua, so I collaborate with him. And so obviously there's that big following even in my home country as well as there is obviously in Britain. I think, that there is a lot of respect towards me, which is great because, I like to follow how people progress. And it's nice to see that, like most of my colleagues or even nationals who have gone abroad to better themselves, they can carry the flag for Malta in a different capacity. So yes, there is that nice feeling that at least people respect that what I'm doing is actually hiring the standards or even like inspiring people back at home.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think that's amazing. People will sort of see that. It's quite inspiring. It helps people to sort of realise their dream and think that all things are possible. I mean, speaking of Anthony Joshua, the first time I saw him fight was in the 212 Olympics, and I took an interest, I'll be quite honest, because he was fighting in the gold medal, and me being of Italian heritage, I was hoping that the Italian guy would win the gold, but AJ one at a time. But it struck me as what a great athlete he is, and I've never met him, I don't know him, but just from what I see on sort of social media, he just seems like the top professional. What's your experience of working with someone along those lines? Ian, what's it like to work with someone of that sort of level?
Yeah, so I started working with Anthony in 2010 when he joined the GB boxing program, and one of the great things is that you can see he uses this hashtag Stay Hungry, like he's hungry to learn new things. So he was hungry then, and still hungry is now. And one of the things that he is he's a gentleman. He's humble. When you speak to him, the nice thing is, even though obviously his status has elevated to a universal status, he still has got time for everybody. Yeah. Obviously, it's hard for him because, everybody wants a piece for him. So, as a professional working with him, I try and respect his time. And make sure that it's not about me. It's about what he needs, and making sure that I can provide that to make sure that his fight fit. But the nice thing is we're a big team. We're a big entourage, if you want to use the boxing term, that collaborate with him. Similarly, even in Olympic boxing, we're a big entourage. I mean, in Olympic boxing, in the GB program, we're 17 support staff altogether between all the doctors, the physios, and all the sports science that are over there. But going back to AJ, one of the nicest things is that it was a pleasure working with him in 2010, 2012, and still is a pleasure working with him now.
That's fantastic. That's a really interesting insight for our listeners, and particularly with boxing. And there's a lot of talking about the heavyweight division at the moment with the success of this country, and has a long tradition of great boxers here. But I suppose in one sense it's easy to forget for the mainstream that obviously there's a world beyond heavyweight. And how's things going in terms of obviously things have changed at this point, the point of the interview, the lockdowns come in, and obviously we all sort of take precautions based on government guidelines, but how's things been sort of building up in terms of obviously Olympics have been postponed as well, but what's the build up like? What's it been like in the camp just in general over the last few months?
Yes, obviously, this was meant to be an Olympic year, and like no sports, we were ramping up the preparations. Everything was looking really good. You probably know that we were actually in London for the qualifiers in March, and the qualifiers started on the Saturday. Sunday, Monday, we're day 3 into it, and suddenly we're told that on the Tuesday it's going to be closed, as in everything is going to be cancelled. We were lucky enough to qualify 2 boxers at that event. So we had 2 qualifying bouts, and both of them managed to go through. Obviously, we still need to see what happens next year when things re-engage again. Obviously, everybody at GB Boxing is gutted that things had to move, but obviously health is a priority.
Of course.
I think one of the things that people need to understand, however, is we've not closed shop. This is, I'd say, now obviously the 3rd week. We're now in lockdown, or stay at home, to use the safer word, in isolation. Yeah. But the reality is that the whole team behind the scenes has been working relentlessly to ensure that, first of all the team has good mental health and is keeping well. So that includes all our coaches, all our support staff, all the admin team, so everybody involved in the program. But we currently have 50 boxers on the program. And all those 50 boxers are being looked after, even if they are in isolation in their own homes. So obviously the advice has been provided by the program that you have to stay at home. We are following strictly the government advice, but we're monitoring them for the illnesses that may occur. But the most important thing for us is that just because everybody's at home and the Olympics have been postponed, it doesn't mean that the program doesn't continue. So every day, people are in contact with them. Every week, the athletes get plans for the training week. So at the end of every week, we give them training plans, and those training plans are very individual, based on their individual needs. If somebody just needs to tick over because everything is okay, yeah, that's great. But if somebody needs to improve in strength, or if, usually they tend to have injuries across the year, it's a good opportunity for us to approach that. So there's a lot of discussion happening on a weekly basis. In fact, most of my mornings are taken with just phone calls, and that's why I organize this day being a bank holiday Friday with you, because usually my days are just literally lots of phone calls and emails. So yes, we're not resting. However, we do know that the most important thing is the health of our boxers, and that's both mental and physical at this current stage.
Absolutely, and I think you've made some great points there. And obviously, any athlete preparing for a 4-year, 8-year cycle, even, of course, absolutely, health is a priority. But equally, you can fully understand the sort of disappointment in one sense, from the point of view is that's the highlight, the pinnacle of one's career, you could say, is the Olympics, and it's really important to have that. In terms of yourself, what are some of your influences? To me, you sort of strike me as someone who's like a really deep thinker, someone who sort of understands philosophy. It's not just about physio, it's also like you bring a philosophy as well to the table too. What's influenced you in terms of having that sort of philosophical outlook and that sort of mental approach as well? Is there anything that sort of influenced you to sort of have that approach?
Yes, so obviously I'm privileged in boxing, not only to be the head physio, but for the last 2 years I've been sort of promoted to the ranks of the head of the performance services. So that means I manage the whole support staff team. So just to give an idea to the listeners, we've got 8 disciplines. We've got the doctors and the physios on the sports medicine side. But then on the sports science, we've got 6 disciplines. So we've got performance analysis, psychology, performance lifestyle, nutrition, strength and conditioning, and physiology. And my role at the moment really is to facilitate the work of all the practitioners. So including myself, we're 17 practitioners working in boxing, which is quite a big number. I know obviously every sport is different. Some sports have more than us and some sports have less than us, but it's quite a big number to manage. And for me, the main thing is to facilitate the conversations, to facilitate how people feel, even on a day-to-day basis. But the main thing is to make sure that we streamline things. Now, you're talking about the philosophy. One of the things that I've taken from living in Greece is actually the philosophy of life. They are very deep thinkers, going back to the times of Aristotle and Homer and so forth. Although, like anybody else, they live a very busy life, and it's all about working and bringing the food home. They're actually very deep thinkers. So even when you speak to young people, you can really hit deep things, and that really left an impact on me, even at the beginning of my career. Mm-hmm. So although from the outside it seems like it's all work and business as usual, my philosophy is, first of all, is live and let live. It's all about enabling people to achieve things, and enabling people to go home and feel that, it's not just about the work, it's about wanting to be there and enjoying it. Mm. So we consider ourselves in GB Boxing a family. Yeah. We call ourselves a family. The same I would say with AJ and the entourage. We are a family. We look after each other. We support each other. I think that's something which is very important, because, in a lot of jobs, in a lot of worlds, it is a bit of a dog-eat-dog sometimes. Mm-hmm. Everybody trying to achieve, everybody trying to have their own piece that they can portray. And even sometimes, you talk about opinions and comments. Sometimes some opinions can be very damaging to colleagues, damaging to a lot of people. So, I try and make sure that with what I say, I'm not damaging anybody. But equally, I don't like when people are either bullying or in the way they're saying things in a very generalized way that they can impact negatively on certain people. So it is all about, as I said, same as we talk about mental and physical being. I think the mental being is a big one. I know it's been in the media a lot for the last few years, and sometimes it looks like it's hyped up. But I do think that, when you are doing very long days at the office, you want to be there because you want to be there, not because you have to be there.
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. There's some really interesting points, and I'm sure our listeners would have really really big insight into your sort of philosophy and how how it sort of has an impact overall on the team. And for me, like, when I used to work in football, one of the things I sort of took note is the importance of the physio, not just from the physiotherapist perspective, but also it's almost like a pastoral role where sometimes the players, the footballers would open up to the physio because they felt safer around the physio rather than sort of maybe speaking to a manager or coach or someone in a performance role. So the physio was sometimes an opportunity for them to speak, and it's such a huge role in sport. I think that sometimes, I wouldn't say is undermined. We know how important it is, but also not just physical but mental too. And it seems like that you do that really well. I suppose on the other side of things is sport. We saw how important sport is to this country, to GB. We've seen how it can lift a nation. 212 lifted the nation. Now it was a huge success in 212. 216 was very successful. Can GB carry on that success, do you think, Ian? Is it hard? I mean, obviously, I think that in one sense almost punched above their weight in the last certainly the last Olympics. It was an amazing achievement. Can GB sort of carry on with that, do you think? Is it sustainable to sort of carry on at that level, or what are your thoughts on that?
The first thing is hope, is it? You always hope that is achievable, because again, the results, sometimes you can't always correlate that with the amount of effort put into it. But the first thing I need to commend and massive praise is for the investment of the government into sports in this country. They recognize that investment into sports doesn't mean that it's just a few people getting the benefit, but as you said, it inspires the nation, it uplifts the nation. You can see how people like Anthony Joshua and obviously Nicole Adams on the female counterpart have inspired lots of young talent to actually go into a gym and start doing that maybe as an activity, but maybe years later they find themselves competing themselves for this great country, which is Great Britain. So I think money is important, like anything else. There's a massive investment and commitment that goes to lots of Olympic and Paralympic sports. Obviously the success of every sport means that the government is then more willing to invest into it. If I look at the boxing, I think it is sustainable, because we are a sport where I've used this phrase before. We're a bit like a phoenix, where after a games, a lot of our boxers will turn professional, and they go on to achieve even higher glory. Anthony Joshua, Nicole Adams, and so forth. You can see lots of our British boxers achieving really good. On the Rio cycle, we had Josh Buatsi, who's he's growing in his from London. He's growing in his performances and doing well. And I think so far what we have proven, at least at GB, is that we will attract the best talent in the country. We will get them into our program. We will support them the best way we can. And our ethos really is, it's not about making them the best boxer they can be. It's about making them the best person they can be. Yeah. So, we've got performance, lifestyle and psychology over there. And although it is, it's performance oriented, the ethos of the program is to try and make these young individuals better And one of the nice things also, you can see there's been an increased participation in the female boxing. So even though sometimes I know the non-connoisseurs will look at it and think like, oh, it's bad. You've got female boxers punching each other. It's not nice. But actually, it's a discipline.
Yes.
They're going into the gyms, they're training hard. Both from a physical and mental point of view, is giving them something to look forward to. And you have to imagine that a lot of our boxers come from a diverse background. Some maybe are privileged. They have parents that can look after them. Others maybe are coming from more impoverished areas. So, they're trying to make something out of themselves and hopefully be in a position that, at the end of their career, not only have they made a good name for themselves, but also provide for their family themselves.
Absolutely.
And make a better life. So I think we need to think about that. All of this at the end of the day is not solely about winning the medal. It is about that inspiration, but also about the journey of what they're trying to create.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point about the funding, and I think it's really important. That's certainly something that we sort of mention, and I certainly bang the drum about a lot about the funding and how it really means a lot to people's sport. And not necessarily everyone can compete in the Olympics, but it's just a great opportunity to sort of watch people at the top of their game and just getting people involved on all levels. That's great for society to get involved in any level that they can do, whatever sport they can get involved in. And I think it's a great thing, can only be a great thing. And just in terms of yourself, is there any sort of highlights that you that come to mind in your own sort of career? I mean, obviously you've had so much experience and so many great, no doubt, highlights. Any sort of highlights that sort of come to mind in your own sort of journey in your profession?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I said, probably the first highlight was when I went to the Athens Olympics, because it was my first Olympics. And if you are in sports and you are in Olympic or Paralympic sports, and you do go to your first Olympics, it's emotional. When the athletes you're working with, they're on the podium and you hear the national anthem of the country you represent, you feel as emotional, if not more sometimes, than the person on the podium. You feel connected, you're part of it. The whole team is connected. You can see, if tears don't come out from the eyes, they're probably somewhere hidden.
Yeah.
But then again, my inspiration, as I said, when I was in the UK and hearing that London was the next one, was to go to London. So London 2012 was another Olympics. And the reality is, it's not like, sometimes people will tell you, well, you've been to many games, you've been to many major tournaments, you must get used to it. You say, well, the only thing I get used to is the fact that I'm experienced and I know what to bring to the table, how to bring it, what to prepare, all of those things. But the emotions on the day are always the same. They will never change, because if the moment you stop having those emotions, it means that probably you don't care anymore. I'm quite a passionate person, so for me, every day I walk into the boxing gym, it's a fantastic day in itself. I've been walking into the boxing gym for GB for the last 11 years, and every day feels fantastic. Every tournament I've gone to, every day of it has been fantastic. And again, another highlights in my career have having worked with Anthony Joshua both in the Olympics, having wrapped his hands in 2012, where he achieved the highest he could have achieved, the highest award could have achieved at an Olympic level. But even recently, obviously, the big highlight in his career was the Rees fight. So, the most recent highlight for me was, again, is bandaging his hands again before he's going into that fight. And also being in his corner as a coachman, when all the world is watching, and, me being part of that coaching team, who have been through that journey of his camp, and then being there, being responsible, if he gets any bad cuts, being ready for that. So again, all this journey has prepared me to be in a position where you can be in that situation and be, using the expression, cool as ice, where actually Did I feel a few butterflies when I was preparing my equipment in the morning? Yes, of course, because I always try and make sure I've got everything ready, like anybody else. But when I walked in with the entourage, when I walked and was in that corner, I had zero emotions because I was literally focused on the job. And then the moment, obviously, he won, obviously all the emotions come back because then you're passionate and you want to do it. So there's lots of highlights. That's definitely in my career. But again, big highlights for me, apart from what seems the obvious, is meeting all the professionals, all the colleagues, making so many friends over the years, people that have supported me over the years. Those for me are massive highlights because, again, there have been people that have challenged me, and almost sometimes you want to do better because they've challenged you. Almost telling you will never achieve that, you'll never do that. And sometimes I thank those people because they've pushed me. But then equally, there have been people that sometimes you don't even know they're working behind the scenes on your own behalf, just because they believe in you. So I think the main thing is there's been massive highlights, and the only way is to enjoy those, is to acknowledge every moment, every day.
Absolutely, that's a great philosophy to have, and I certainly think that some of the things that you've talked about from a philosophical point of view, we can sort of take note of that just in day-to-day life, and just getting up and doing the best we can in the circumstances we're in. I think that's really important stuff. It's been really fascinating, the interview. I'm sure our listeners have really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. It's been phenomenal. I really want to thank you for coming on board the show, Ian. It's been a really interesting insight for our listeners and for me as well. I've really enjoyed the show, Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with Jimmy Petruzzi, interviewing Ian Gatt, who's the head of performance services and lead physiotherapist at GB Boxing, and one of the top professionals in sport. Listening to him and his philosophy and what he had to say about his own career is an inspiration in itself, and no doubt we'll be looking out to see how GB Boxing does, and with every confidence with people like Ian involved, that they'll carry on sort of doing exceptionally well. So thanks again, Ian, for being on the show, and we'll sort of keep a close eye and think how things go for you guys as and when the Olympics materialises next year.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jimmy, for having me. And my last note to all the listeners is, in this current period, which is obviously there's a lot of controversies and there's a lot going on, and we could be over worrying about lots of things which we don't have control of. I'd say control the controllables, which means pause a little bit and think about what you can actually achieve during this period for your own self, your family, your friends, and so that when you come out of this period, when we all come out as a nation, at least we would all have seen a bit of that silver lining.
Absolutely, for sure. There are difficult times, and it can be very challenging and unsettling. But that's said and done, and like you said, all we can do is just control the controllables, keep focused, and pull together as one, and that's the whole idea, I think. But thanks again for being on the show, and I really appreciate it. And best wishes for your career and future endeavours.
Thanks, Jimmy.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi on the Friday Sports Show, bringing you all the news from the local area and around the world. We bring you a wide variety of guests on this show, world-class athletes, sports people who work in sport across a broad range of areas, and we bring you people and guests from all around the world, all sort of cover all corners of the world, and straight to your living room, wherever you're listening to the show. You could be driving and listening into the show, or whatever you do to tune in. And the aim of the show is to increase sporting awareness and participation. And today we bring you a fascinating guest who works in the other side of the world, and we're going to get a really interesting insight into what she does and how she went about getting into the role. And I think it's a really fascinating insight when we bring you guests that work in different parts of the globe to give you an illustration of what is out there and what people do. And sometimes it's easy to sort of look around the area, and I think getting people to inspire us is a good thing. So Sarah, Rees, thank you for coming on board the show. Great to have you on board.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, Sarah. So you're the you work in as an athlete lifestyle support person with the Hong Kong Rugby Union. Is that how's that going for you?
Yeah, it's good. Interesting times at the moment, of course, with us in the situation that
Absolutely,
we're in.
Yeah.
And so that's providing that's sort of presenting its own challenges. But prior to this situation, it's a really enjoyable job. Yeah, enjoy it, thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah. It's really interesting you mentioned there, and at the point of this recording, we're pre-recording at the moment because of the the situation with the pandemic, and sort of we're pre-recording at this point in the UK. Sarah, we're on lockdown at the moment, so literally on lockdown, and the lot of things are closed, and we're doing the best we can, and it's really interesting to sort of to get the perspective. I suppose you're in Hong Kong at the moment. What's it been like in Hong Kong? The actual pandemic itself. How's it affected your work and just day-to-day life?
It's the effect has been massive. I think we're sort of in the second wave at the minute. We had the first wave where we were off work and working from home. Schools were closed, and then things seemed to calm down a little bit, so we were able to go back to work, and literally 2 weeks later back into it. We're now in what they call, I think, the lockdown stage 3. Back to just 4 people allowed to be together at any one time. What that does for us in the sporting community as a rugby team, it's really difficult because obviously you've got to train as a team. So we're having to be quite creative in the way that we're getting the boys and the girls to train and to keep motivated and to keep interacting with each other as such. And I think while social media isn't my favourite thing, I think the arrival of all these different platforms of like WhatsApp and Zoom and House Party and all of that is absolutely invaluable. So we're trying to keep the training going. My role here is to keep their mental health as well as possible. And what I'm advising really is to keep as much as you can to your normally daily schedule. And if you can't do that, prepare a schedule for yourself. So you're getting up at a good time. You're getting up, if you get up at 7 o'clock, still get up at 7. And then put some things into your day, like, reading, meditation, learning something new, a new skill, exercising as much as you can. I mean, it's great what some of them are doing. They're sending us videos in of them, filling a suitcase up with cans and lifting them up and doing exercises with them and running on the spot. And it's just, this is a great time to be creative.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. You mentioned that, and the reason being is that for me, Sarah, I guess similar to yourself, I have roles that sort of I lecture, I do a few other things as well, and organise events, and it's been kind of surreal because I suppose similar to yourself, you set a plan out with your learners or your athletes, and obviously things change all the time, and I don't know what it's like in Hong Kong, but here things have changed so rapidly. I mean, I think back to say even a few weeks ago, it was like so different to what it is now. And I mean, has that been a challenge? Has that been the same in Hong Kong, where things have sort of happened really, really quickly, where you just have to adapt really, really fast to the new changes, precautions that have been brought in?
Yeah, the government here they seem to be really on top of it. I'm not sure of the situation in the UK because I see the news every so often, but obviously here on the ground here, it's we're getting it seems to be good notice about what's coming in and when it's coming in. So we knew that on like the 19th of March, if you came in, then you were going to have to, if you came in from overseas, you had to wear a tag for 14 days, you had to self-isolate. So we know then that there are people that we have to do something different for if they've been away. For those that have been here, the players were in until the very last minute, and then the government said, right, from I think it was like 3 days ago, no more than 4 people together at a time. So obviously we had to then disperse the squads. So we have had to react really quickly because it is an ever-changing situation. And I just feel, with, like I said before, with the communication plans that we've got, you can keep in good contact with people, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be speaking to people every day,
absolutely.
and you shouldn't be, looking at what they're doing. And I put messages on our WhatsApp groups to say, look, if anybody is struggling, just give me a call. We can still talk, just because we're not face to face. We can be face to face on a WhatsApp call or a video, or whatever suits them.
Absolutely, that's a sort of great insight, and I suppose similar to yourself. I mean, it's one of them. We just sort of adapt, and we've certainly had to do and adapt really, really quick. But I suppose in one sense too, with technology, it can make things a lot easier in terms of keeping in touch and that sort of stuff. But I suppose in terms of your role, lifestyle support manager, what does that involve, Sarah? You sort of give us a bit of an insight there indirectly, but talk us through, say, a normal day for you. I mean, obviously things have changed dramatically now, but generally speaking, yeah.
So a normal day for me, if I go in the sort of the day in the life of an athlete, I suppose. As soon as an athlete joins the Hong Kong Rugby Union, they go through a sort of a procedure where they meet the coaches and they meet the physios and they meet everybody. And one of those things, they'll come and meet me, and I'll do I call it a speed date, where I just sit and I call it a speed date because I want to make it quick for them. So it's literally just a series of questions that I ask them to get some inside information from them, just about how old are they, where were they born. Where you're born is quite interesting for us because we'd like them to be Hong Kong qualified so they can play for Hong Kong, because we've got a lot of players that come in from overseas. And then just sort of, are they married, divorced, engaged, single, and do they have children, just to get a background into them. And I feel my job is really important here because there are a lot of people that are overseas, so they don't have family with them. They've come over either to play rugby or they've come over for a job, and then they play rugby sort of part time. So that's one of the main things I do, and then I talk to them about continual professional development. One of the key things that we need them to do is to have something in preparation for transition, because a player, in my eyes, will never know when they're going to transition out of the game, because they can have a career-ending injury at any moment. So we offer some CPD funding, continual professional development funding, and ensure that they are learning or they're earning. So a lot of them will do like a personal training qualification, or they'll do an online degree course. There's just it depending on what they want and if we can access it for them. Some people actually do go in. Some of the players do actually go into university part time, and we've got memorandum of understandings with universities here. So if they're a Hong Kong qualified athlete, they can have longer time to complete their university degrees. So that's the transition. That's a big part of it, is to make sure that they are learning or earning for when that moment does arrive. I also do some workshops with them on CV writing and networking and presenting, and I don't present all of those. I'll get somebody in to come and talk to them about whatever it is that's key at the time that we feel that needs to be done. Networking skills are good. An elevator pitch is always really nice, because a lot of them as well are in finance, or they're in recruitment, or they have different jobs. So it's just good for them to be able to express themselves really clearly if they're meeting somebody that could potentially be an employer for them in the future.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's...
Yeah, no, I was just thinking there. Sort of, you cover quite a wide range of areas, and it's really interesting because certain conversations I've had with sports people is what do they do after their sporting career, and that seems to be. Is there one eye on that with yourself, Sarah, in terms of once during and after the
for me, it's massive, and that hence the CPD is that what do they do after rugby, and you read all the awful stories of the Drew Mitchells who just completely sort of fell off the face of the earth when he left. And, that shouldn't be happening in my world, that shouldn't be happening to any athlete. They should be well prepared for it. And if anybody leaves our program, then I'll do an exit interview with them. And one of the things is, do I feel that they're at risk in any way, that they haven't got anything to go to? So even if they leave the program, I will still ensure that I keep in touch with them and offer support wherever they need it. And this comes to, a little bit of my background of having a bit of depression, which I think I spoke to you about, pre coming on air. And I just don't think anybody needs to be suffering when you've got people around you that can offer help, and why wouldn't I? For me, it's a real key point that they have something to go to after rugby.
Yeah, exactly. Really, I think it's a great point, and I think that certainly in my conversations with many athletes, that seems to be a big problem. That sort of loss of identity from being a sports person to sort of where do I go here? And I think to make that transition a lot smoother, having people like yourself is invaluable, really, because you can sort of speak to someone and identify skills, gaps, and just general things that we sort of take for granted sometimes. That if you've just been focusing on sport predominantly all your life, then there's certain things. You got a lot of transferable skills, but there are a lot of skills that you probably need to sort of catch up on, like maybe using even IT and things like that, and just like he says, identifying courses to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just to keep them fresh and current as well, because whilst rugby does take up quite a bit of time, they'll train for most part of the day. They have a Wednesday off. They may play on a Saturday. They'll have a Sunday off. They finish anything they can, a normal day. They probably finish about 2-3 o'clock. And that's a short day, so why shouldn't they be doing something else that's positive? And it's important to use their time valuably and wisely, I think.
Absolutely, and certainly, when I used to work in football, that was one thing I would advocate the younger players. I was always like, okay, do your education and learn, and because obviously sport is a short-lived career, but not only that, there's no guarantees in sport. You just never know, injury, illness, and things can change really, really quickly for anyone's career. But in terms of Hong Kong rugby, that's an interesting one. I mean, we saw Japan in the World Cup entertain and play a really, really great expansive game of rugby. Obviously, they hosted the World Cup, and Japan has a huge population and many resources. But where do you see Hong Kong in the big scheme of things yourself, Sarah? Where, from terms of what can they achieve in rugby realistically on the global stage?
Oh God, that's such an interesting question, and you're probably speaking to the wrong person.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we overachieve in everything that we do. We are a small nation. I think the playing base in total is something around 1,000 players throughout the clubs, because we have a club system here as well. Our full-time 15 athletes, I think we have about 35 of them. So it's not a big base to choose from. And we got to the World Cup repechage in 15s, and we lost out against Germany and Canada. Yet they were better than us, but for us, as the small nation that we are, to actually get to a World Cup repechage is phenomenal. We're also Asian champions at the moment, which is superb, and we also have a good sevens system as well. So the men's sevens are also Asian champions as well.
Yeah, that's really
so there's still places for us to go. There's still Olympics, and there's still actually to get to a World Cup. So we're working really hard at getting ourselves there.
It's an interesting point. Obviously, you've mentioned there, it's a sort of with the obviously small player base to choose from. It's not easy. Some of the more traditional nations, obviously, they've got a huge player base, but you've got emerging nations like Canada's. Obviously, they're a good team, and I mean, do the players believe? I know it's a difficult question to answer, and it's probably better directed at them and the coaching staff. But do they sort of believe that it can be done? That they can sort of maybe get to the World Cup sometime, or?
Yeah, if they didn't believe it, they wouldn't be playing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simple as that. They have to believe it, and the coaches are fantastic. They are instilling that belief in them. Every day they go out on the pitch, every day they go out on the training field. You look at the training facilities here, as I said, there's no green space in Hong Kong. Everything is like a 4G pitch, or they train on the 6th floor of a building. But all around the offices, all around the building is, positive messages for the boys and the girls, right the way through. So they see it every day, they live it every day, they breathe it. And like I say, if they didn't believe it, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of recruitment, player recruitment, you mentioned there player recruitment. I mean, let's say, for example, someone was born in Hong Kong, but they're living and playing in, say, France, for example. Is there a possibility for them to be considered for the team, or how does that sort of work?
Yeah.
Do they have to be playing in Hong Kong, or?
Yeah, trying to remember what the actual criteria is here. You have to be born in Hong Kong, and I think you might have to have a Hong Kong passport. Certainly, you have to have a Hong Kong passport for 7s. For 15s, you have to be in Hong Kong for 5 years and be a permanent resident to be able to play. So if you are born in Hong Kong and you have a Hong Kong ID, permanent ID, and you go and live abroad for a while, that's fine. And we do searches every so often to try and get players to come back. If you are an overseas player and you come to Hong Kong, you have to be here for 5 years now before you can become a permanent resident. 7 years before a permanent resident, but 5 years then before you can actually play for Hong Kong.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult question to answer. And obviously, it's all sorts of rules and regulations. But I guess in one sense, Sarah, if anyone's listening and who thinks they might qualify, then we'll have to get them to drop you guys. Absolutely. The show does go out, and I suppose in one sense, it's one of them, isn't it? So if obviously if one did qualify, it'd be an exciting journey, you'd think, to sort of to play rugby. I mean, tell us about what the experience would be like. If let's say, for example, someone sort of, listening in who thinks they might sort of qualify, what would the experience be like for them, Sarah? What's the general experience like to play rugby for Hong Kong?
Yeah, it'd be awesome. You get world-class coaches. You get myself looking after you with the athlete lifestyle support. You'll play for a club as well as playing for the national squad. And in that club game, there is a club system. So you do get a good amount of playing time. There's different competitions throughout the year. So at the moment, I don't know if you've heard of Global Rapid Rugby, but that's also stopped actually because of the coronavirus. Yeah. But that's an incredible tournament. They've changed the laws slightly. So they have things like a golden try and slightly different point systems, so it enables a faster, more free-flowing game. And so there's that to be involved in as well, although that isn't necessarily based on your credentials as a Hong Kong ID holder, but that's part of the package as well. So that's really exciting, and they've been over in Fiji, Samoa, they play New Zealand, in Australia. So the travel is pretty spectacular out here. So that's one thing, and then of course there's the Asian Championship, which is normally between Japan, I'm going to say Korea, off the top of my head, and so and they're home and away games as well. So it's a good level of competition, really good level of competition, and good experience in travelling a little bit of the world. Absolutely,
no, that's really fascinating, and all things said and done, if people obviously may qualify, what an experience that would be to sort of play in those areas you mentioned. And it's really amazing that you could be playing full-time rugby and sort of rubbing shoulders against the the elite really in the game, and that's a huge thing. And in terms of the actual training itself, I mean, you mentioned training, so the players that train full-time, and so what's it like for them? They train every day, or what?
They train every day. Well, they train Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays is a rest day, Thursdays, Fridays, depending on the phase that they're in. they could train. They could train Saturdays. They could train as well Tuesday, Thursday evenings. It just depends on whether it's a competition phase, whether it's a rest phase. It's like any other club throughout the world, really. It just depends on where they're at in the season. As to the sort of the intensity of the training. Yeah.
And what's the domestic setup like there, Sarah? What's the sort of domestic rugby setup there? Is it does that work towards sort of providing players for you guys at the
Yeah, it does. It's sort of written in for the clubs that are there. It's written in for them that the Hong Kong players have to play a certain amount of games, and they have to have so many people within the squad that are eligible, and so it does help to feed the system through to the national squad.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point there, because obviously I think it's really important. Obviously, one blending the recruitment with sort of players that are established and could qualify, but also players coming through is always a good thing too. Yeah.
We have a good junior setup as well in the age grades, and so we do keep a good eye on the players coming through, the younger players coming through, and then part of my job as well is to try and keep these players in Hong Kong rather than going abroad for university, to keep them here, because as I've said before, we have a memorandum of understanding with universities so that they can take a little bit more time off to train, and if they're an elite athlete. So yeah, we try and encourage them to stay from as young as possible, really. But it's tough because a lot of kids that have been born here or that have come here from a very early age, Hong Kong is a tiny place, and so it's understandable that some of these players, they do want to go abroad for university.
Yes.
So we have somebody who monitors them, and he'll go out to like the Rosslyn Park Sevens and to different tournaments, and he coaches them through into the Junior World Trophy. So he tries to get them to understand that they can have really good level of competition, really good experience of playing rugby at a high level, as well as studying. So yeah, we do everything we possibly can to keep the guys and the girls in Hong Kong with us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess we interview people on this show, Sarah, from all around the world, and in terms of they sort of they give us an insight into what it's like, coaching or playing sport in different parts of the globe. And in terms of, say, for example, let's say someone was sort of going to Hong Kong to play, or they were considering going over there. Just in general, what's it like? I mean, how have you adapted to? I mean, me personally, I love sort of travelling and working in different places, and sort of I like different cultures, and one of the things I do consciously when I go to any country is sort of really absorb myself in the culture and learn. But what's it like being for yourself and say anyone coming into Hong Kong to get involved in rugby? What are some of the things that they sort of in terms of sort of adapting to different plays? What's it like?
Now isn't the best time, obviously, to be coming over.